Hello there, everybody. It's me, Garrett Kidney, the co-host of You've Got to Be Kidding Me on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
And I am Liam Jones, my full name, and I'm also a part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network as a co-host for You've Got to Be Kidding Me.
We are a TNA history podcast that covers TNA 1 month at a time. We cover all the drama, all the matches, all the Vince Russo nonsense you could ever want in your life.
Have you heard of TNA? I bet you have, but would it be funnier if two people made jokes over it the whole time? Probably.
So if that sounds like fun to you, check it out on this very Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network, and Liam will do bits and whatnot.
Going to the gym can be discouraging, especially if you're putting in the work but barely seeing changes. But with Tonal, you can actually see your progress with every workout. Tonal provides the convenience of a full gym and the expertise of a personal trainer anytime at home with one sleek system. Designed to reduce your mental load, Tonal is the ultimate strength training system, helping you focus less on workout planning and more on getting results. No more second-guessing your technique. Tonal gives you real-time coaching cues to dial in your form and help you lift safely and effectively. After a quick assessment, Tonal sets the optimal weight for every move and adjusts in 1 pound increments as you get stronger, so you're always challenged. Tonal lets you choose from a variety of expert-led workouts, from strength to arrow hit to yoga and mobility to keep you coming back for more. For a limited time, go to Tonal.com to get $500 off your Tonal purchase, plus a free 4-year warranty. That's Tonal.com for $500 off, plus a free 4-year warranty. Tonal.com.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back to Those Days, a Michinoku Pro Retrospective. Episode 6, Sasuke Retires. Those Days is a project brought to you by Open the Voice Gate and the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find Those Days on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on the Open the Voice Gate feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Open the Voice Gate on social media at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing sites. You click the red box that says sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or recurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts for Those Days. I'm Mike Spears, and I'm joined, as always, by your other host, Case Lowe. In case we enter episode 6 in the summer of 1994, arguably at a time, at least to a point where Michinoku Pro is at its peak and it's still continuing to go, really fresh off of Michinoku Pro and the great Sasuke's entrance into New Japan Pro Wrestling through the 1994 first Super J Cup, and then the Michinoku Pro had their own big show a few weeks later at Oda Ward Gymnasium, getting almost 5,000 people into Tokyo, only 14 months after this promotion is formed. We're looking into the summer of 1994, and I think it's very easy and very authoritatively we can say by this time Michinoku Pro is now a thing.
It's a strange mix of a promotion that set out to be a regional wrestling promotion, and then as soon as they stepped out of that region, they got all of this attention, some legitimate mainstream attention in the form of Sasuke, and have become all of a sudden this very influential figure in wrestling in Japan, and then we start to see that creep into the rest of the world. They become a real political pawn in a number of different things during a high point in Japanese wrestling history, and they become a desired chess piece by some of the most important, some of the most famous, some of the wealthiest figures in Japanese wrestling history. It all snowballs from, as we've discussed, by the end of 1993, they have a firm partnership with Onita. Onita brings in a certain level of following. Then they go to Tokyo, and it becomes a thing that they're in Tokyo. And then Sasuke works Jacob, and that takes it up to an entirely another level. Like you said, they have the Ota Ward show at the end of April. And as we head into March, and we'll cover everything here I'm sorry, not March, but May, everything from May through July, Michinoku Pro related. The names that are mentioned in these notes, these shows that the great Sasuke appears on, these shows that Jinsei Shinzaki appears on, the people that want Jinsei Shinzaki on the roster, it's hard to believe that a year ago we were asking the question on this timeline, is regional wrestling even sustainable in Japan? What is the ceiling of Michinoku Pro? We're only 1 year into the existence of this promotion, and things could not be more different than they were when this promotion started.
Yeah, and I think that throughout this episode, we will kind of get a lot of this, how quickly things have changed. And really, if you want to look back to like 1992 and how they did like the probative first attempts to being the Tohoku branch of Universal Lucha Libre, just that 24-month period when you talk about these wrestlers, and especially when you talk about the ones that were from UWA, and there's a lot of beyond the grave UWA stuff that kind of works in this episode. Before you know it, and throughout this this period of this episode, we're going to see shows where you have Super Delphin main event in Osaka at what is now known as Edion Arena Osaka, getting 6,000 people. You're talking about a really well-developed feud that brings New Japan and Michinoku Pro in such a manner that you have like in Hokkaido, which is not Tohoku, but if you just go a little bit more north there, you have him doing matches that are like 5,000 attendance, and that's not even getting into the situation with Jinsei Senzaki over the summer. It becomes a real fascinating thing when you think about, especially for Sasuke and Delphin. Less than 2 years before this, they were struggling just to find enough to have enough wrestling matches to even consider themselves part-time pro wrestlers. Now they're the bells of the ball all throughout Japan, and as we'll see, attention now is drawn towards them from the greater wrestling world.
Extremely well put. Let's jump into the timeline. Like I said, we're going to cover everything from May through July 1994 Michinoku Pro in this episode. That means we only have one Michinoku Pro show in full to review, but we have plenty of other stuff to dive into with this timeline. And Mike, we begin this timeline very quickly. We have to make one of our final stops in FMW proper, the FMW 5th anniversary show, May 5th, 1994, Kawasaki Stadium. This is the show headlined by Tenryu versus Onita in a no-ropes barbed wire explosion match. This also had Terry Funk versus The Sheik on it, which feels timely given, again, we're recording this just a few weeks after the passing of Sabu. Sabu was on this show, Damien and Sabu, against Dr. Luther and Michinoku Pro's own Yone Ginjin. But we are here to briefly discuss the opener. We get a clipped version of this on the official FMW release, the actual match time, 1849. Battle Ranger Koji Nakagawa and Masato Tanaka. They defeated the Michinoku Pro trio of Hanzo Nakajima, Shiryu, and the great Sasuke. Mike, we are once again back on a giant FMW show.
Yeah, and I think one of like our takeaways from this episode, especially for how the undercard in Michinoku Pro has like greatly changed over just the period of this episode. Hanzo Nakajima suddenly is now remasked out of nowhere, and Shiryu, between this and a 8-man tag we'll talk about later, we might need to move. Is Shiryu good? The window that we're expecting for, because there's some real good glimpses of him in this match, but it's real interesting. Like, you see the trappings of like Battle Ranger, and especially with where kind of things were in the junior heavyweight landscape, it kind of feels like a real diversion point where last week we were talking about like how Battle Ranger was supposed to be figuring into the Super J Cup, and then by the fact that Michinoku Pro completely kind of becomes the real winners of that situation, they're the ones who their junior heavyweight wrestling is now ascendant, and it kind of feels like this match is like two trains now finally diverging after running with each other for the last 20 months, more or less.
Really interesting point that I hadn't thought of there, because you have to remember, we go back to episode 1 and talk about how, the original concept for what became FMW was a promotion that was backed by Onita and Hisashi Shinma, and how it was going to be, karate and hardcore wrestling mixed with lucha libre. It was going to be FMW with the universal lucha libre roster that was led by Gran Hamada, and that didn't happen. And as the 90s progresses, you've got Liger versus Sano and New Japan in 90 and 91. And I don't want to say that the junior heavyweight landscape in Japan was entirely depleted in 90 and 91 and 92, but it certainly wasn't what it would become. And FMW, to some degree, were leading the charge in junior heavyweight wrestling at the time. And you see, even on the big shows that Michinoku Pro appears in, the fourth anniversary show, May of 93, and then the August 1993 stadium show that they're also on, the juniors are kind of looked at as peers. And quite honestly, I think this May 5th, 1994 match is the weakest of the Michinoku Pro FMW matches that we've seen. The only real novelty here is Masato Tanaka doing a borderline Lucharesu match. But by this point in time, the Michinoku guys, they're just far better workers. They're far more polished. They're far more charismatic. If Masato Tanaka, watching this in 2025 eyes, if Masato Tanaka was replaced with any other wrestler, this would be an entirely skippable match.
Yeah, and I think like the real kind of like situation even put on display, the finish, Battle Ranger botched a Hurricane Rana some like the worst way I've ever seen. And you kind of have like a moment like that, especially with someone like Sasuke, who has kind of transcended botching, and we could almost say like the Sabu effect of, were certain botches planned or not? But this one kind of really, after that match and after like that finish, it felt like, okay, and now we're done with each other. Like it's clear at this point that other than a relationship with Onita that we'll get into future episodes, the two concepts are so far apart. And I Tanaka is very fun in this. Him and Sasuke have a great sequence. But when I'm coming out of this match going like, who I think now might actually be pretty good now, Case? Shiryu. That tells you a lot about the match, I feel like.
Well, it's about time you started putting respect on his name. Through the first 5 episodes of this series, you've done nothing but slander a guy who has been a perfectly fine wrestler.
I mean, he's just not taking the big steps that we see from like even like Taka Michinoku or people like that. But now it feels like he's online, and it feels like he's coming online at a very good point in his career, given what's going to happen in the fall of 94.
We go back to the timeline. We go to the Wrestling Observer newsletter section, and we go to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and we go to the WWF section for the first time in this show's history. May 16th, 1994, Dave writes, the Japan Mania Tour, which opened on 5/7 in the Yokohama Arena, appears on the surface to be a flop. Despite tons of publicity in the magazines and special magazines printed to hype the tour, the audience seemed to be limited to hardcores. Those in Japan said part of the problem was that they didn't poster the cities, which is traditional for all Japanese groups, and there weren't enough television ads leading up to the show. The first show drew an announced 8,056 in the 17,000 capacity arena that has never drawn below 8,000 fans for wrestling before, but live estimates claim that 4,000 is really closer to reality. Shawn Michaels no-showed the tour and was replaced by Rick Martel. By and large, the wrestlers attempted to wrestle Japanese style, but those who attended, most of whom were familiar with the WWF through its home video releases of pay-per-view shows, expected more special effects and were disappointed with both the shows and the match quality. Undertaker, in his first matches since going on hiatus in January, was by far the most popular wrestler on the tour, with Randy Savage second, although Savage tried to play heel against Hart, but fans cheered him more than Hart anyways. The downside is that even though the wrestlers were trying to do the Japanese style, there appeared to be a lack of understanding that the referees counted fast on the pins and called for the bell the minute finishing submissions were put on, while Japanese fans expect the guys caught to put up a big struggle before submitting, which resulted in a lot of booing of the finishes in Yokohama. Although Bret Hart isn't considered a major star by Japanese fans, even though the magazines have heavily pushed him as such, his matches with Savage and Bam Bam Bigelow the first 2 nights were said to have been great. Also in Yokohama, Undertaker and Tenryu beat Bam Bam Bigelow and Yokozuna in 1817 when Undertaker pinned Yokozuna with a chokeslam after Bigelow accidentally squashed him. Bull Nakano pinned Alundra Blaze in a non-title match, which was said to be only slightly above average, but the second best match on the show. I mention all of this because Dave continues, in Nagoya on 5/8, they announced 6,735 in a 12,000-seat arena, but live estimates pegged it at 2,500, although it was said to have been a better wrestling show wrestling-wise, with 1-2-3 Kid versus Jinsei Shinzaki, Blaze versus Saki Hasegawa, and Hart versus Bigelow as good matches, and Doink and Dink getting over as comedy performers. However, Yokozuna Undertaker was a flop, with Yokozuna losing via one of those quick WWF-style count-out finishes in just 4 minutes, with fans chanting refund after the match. Mike, we officially have Jinsei Shinzaki in the WWF. This is a part of their 1994 Japanese tour. And thank you to the great Roy Lucier, we have the fan cam of Jinsei Shinzaki versus 1-2-3 Kid on YouTube. And this is an absolutely fascinating match.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, one of the things that kind of makes this match a lot of fun and fascinating is that the crowd was really getting into it, and at least like for a promotion that like Michinoku Pro ran, there was like some Jinsei Shinzaki in Nagoya, but he was not necessarily that has not been a focus of the promotion. Seeing the fact that his gimmick was over to like that degree seemed really kind of fun. And I had a note here, Case. I think this is the first time that Shinzaki does the painted on script on his chest, because I definitely noticed that through his entrance. But this was just a really fun, fascinating match, and one that is kind of understandable how these two would work so well together, and with a level of ease that it felt kind of, in a way, like a polished Indies match that you could have seen up in Minnesota in 92 or 93.
Yeah, there's a few guys throughout wrestling history that you wish could have a do-over. Even somebody with a great career like Samoa Joe, somebody that I think is a Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Famer. You look at Joe's career and you look at those 7 or 8 years in TNA with 5 or 6 of them being largely irrelevant, with him being out of shape and him being unmotivated, and you go like, man, I wish we could have drawn that career up again. And Waltman, although he had his personal issues, and for a lot of the 90s and early 2000s, certainly did not help himself by any means, it is, to some degree, absolutely devastating that he is at this point working early 90s WWF and is not in a J Cup and is not doing Super Juniors and is not, continuing the evolution of what he learned in Universal Pro Wrestling. Because this match with Shinzaki, it's very, very clear that they have chemistry here. And even with that in mind, I ask you, why did the WWF want Jinsei Shinzaki? Like, one of the big winners of this project so far, I think Shinzaki is, at least in the early 90s, a far better wrestler than I ever gave him credit for. But it's always confused me. And watching this match, I don't know if I was expecting Bret Hart, Tom McGee levels of like, oh my God, we got to sign this guy right now. He's going to be a huge star. But it was just like, hey, Shinzaki versus 1-2-3 Kid was great, but why are they so desperate to sign Shinzaki?
Yeah, and this is like one of those topics that we're going to revisit in 1997, of course, because of all the situation with the WWF light heavyweight title and all of that. But in 1994, choosing Shinzaki when he was incredibly protected and kind of treated as like a special act in of himself in Michinoku Pro, when you look at kind of the rest of the roster, and especially like 1994 WWF, like the kind of things that would come with the new generation, the person that I feel like that could have been interesting, but it might have been size issues, would have been Delphin in there with like 1-2-3 Kid. But maybe it is that he always was a heavier guy, and he looks a lot more like him match up 1-2-3 Kid, and even like the idea that 1-2-3 Kid is an incredibly tall person. Waltman is over 6 feet tall. It's just the reality of the matter of the guy who's always with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He's going to look like a degree of shorter, right? But like Shinzaki matching up against Waltman here looks a lot more similar than like the disparity that you would have had with Sasuke in there with him, right? Like, I feel like that had to have been a level of that. And also, fact of the matter is that a lot, let's talk about like your name big Michinoku Pro stars by 94. It's Sasuke, who was not going to job. He would not do this match in job. He wouldn't do that in 1994. And we're not even getting into some of his wild stuff that we'll get into later this episode. it was clear that they wouldn't have sent Delphin given what was going to happen with Delphin over the next few months. And then after that, then you're like looking at people like Shinzaki, and that's someone that I don't think there would have been some sort of ego about it. So I think there's a lot of like just random reasons why it makes sense with Jinsei Shinzaki, even though I don't know like stylistically necessarily there, or the idea of some of the super workers in Michinoku Pro having a better match with 1-2-3 Kid here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because we'll obviously talk a little bit more about Shinzaki in this episode, and then over the next two, it's his split from Michinoku and him, going to America, and we cover that. We won't really cover a lot of his 1995 when he's in America full time. We'll mention it here and there, but I guess I'm throwing this out there now because my initial research has not necessarily netted me a result that I'm happy with. Because if you listen to a YouTube clip of Bruce Pritchard shoots on Michinoku Pro wrestlers in WWF, or Jim Cornette on The Great Sasuke, or whatever bad YouTube videos I was watching to try to find a result for this, it didn't really lead me anywhere in terms of why Shinzaki was wanted. I mean, of course, he's fantastic and he's got this great look, but it's 1994 WWF. A Japanese middleweight doesn't seem like somebody that they're necessarily desperate for. So I find that entire thing to be very interesting. From a historical standpoint, I enjoy this Shinzaki versus Waltman match quite a bit. And it's just a bummer that Waltman doesn't have, a Michinoku tour in 93 and a Michinoku tour in 94. And I feel like this is a guy who could have really thrived in this environment, because this is a really good match. It's worth watching if you've never seen it before.
Yeah, easily so. Like, just imagine Waltman and a Fukaman, like giving him like a American gimmick and a mask just in there for like that kind of tournament, and getting it the ability to face off against like your Hamadas and your Karas and things like that. Like, there's a lot of options there that I feel like could have happened if the universe broke a different way. But I feel like, as you said, but before introing this match, he might be the person in wrestling history that I think everyone's kind of wondering what it would have been if things broke a different way with him. It definitely feels that way, and this kind of gave another portal to what could have been, at least.
We continue on the timeline here. This is going to mention a few different promotions, and I think it speaks to 1993, I'm doing the command find for Michinoku Pro Wrestling and the Observers, and there's not a ton there. Then all of a sudden, 94, you have all of these different things. We'll start here, April 29th, 1994, Observers. So going back just a little bit from the Japanese to our write-up, where Dave writes, the round-robin best of the Super Junior tournament will take place from 5/26 to 6/15, with the finals at Budokan Hall. Foreigners brought in for the tournament will be Brad Armstrong, David Finlay, Black Tiger, and Wild Pegasus, while it is expected that wrestlers from other Japanese offices, including Ricky Fuji, Great Sasuke, Gato, and Hayabusa, will be involved alongside New Japan's Jushin Liger, El Samurai, and Shinjiro Otani. Dave also notes in this Observer that FMW is planning on doing its own junior heavyweight tournament, and asked New Japan for reciprocal help sending Liger and or Samurai plus wrestlers from Mexico and Michinoku Pro. To my knowledge, that doesn't happen. We continue here, 5/9 Observer. The round-robin junior heavyweight tournament from 5/26 to 6/13 is something of a disappointment, with Sasuke, Ultimo, and Gato not involved. The lineup is Liger, Samurai, Otani, Ishizawa, Pegasus, Tigers, Delphin, Motegi, Michinoku, Finlay, and Malenko. And then Dave notes that matchups have not been announced yet, but it seems almost guaranteed that Liger will, after not making the finals last year and at the J-Cup, will come back and probably beat Pegasus in the finals. So we have the New Japan Super Juniors lineup for 94 here. And as we were talking about the fervor to go see Michinoku Pro wrestlers at the top of this episode, you see noted disappointment when Sasuke is not involved in this tournament, even with Delphin being involved.
Right, and I don't know necessarily if this is with a round-robin tournament, you get Sasuke with level of protection of himself, because that is definitely an aspect that I think has to be considered a little bit. But I think like when as we move through the notes about the reasons why at least Gato and Ultimo don't show up, it becomes kind of clear. I just wonder how much like Sasuke was like, I just don't see myself wanting to have to be in a situation where I might have to drop up a block match against the future Kendo Kashin. Like it fits with his personality that, and as we talked about like the Super J Cup and how people had slots and then refused them because they didn't want a job. I think that there's a legitimate option that could have been why Sasuke wasn't involved in this one.
I think you're right about that. Delphin finishes the block with 7 points. His block play is he beats Taka, he beats Motegi, he loses to Liger, which makes sense. He beats Finley, he beats Black Tiger, he beats Otani, he beats Ishizawa, and then he loses to Samurai and he loses to Wild Pegasus before ending his block beating Dean Malenko. So you look at who he loses to, it's the top dogs. It's Liger, it's Samurai, and it's Pegasus. I think you could have thrown Sasuke in that environment, and maybe at this point in time, the El Samurai loss would have been a little bit beneath Sasuke, but they kept Delphin really strong in this tournament. He leads the block for basically the entire tournament.
Yeah, and that would make a lot of sense when we will talk about like the final match and how it kind of situates with Delphin. In like the power of hindsight, it makes me wonder, really, like, was this all really planned with Delphin, given the fact of where the final match was between him and Liger? Like,
I think it was completely. I think they never had a chance of getting Sasuke in this tournament. I don't necessarily think it was because he wouldn't do jobs. I think they had a plan for Delphin and a plan for Sasuke, and one of those plans involved the Super Juniors tournament, and the other one didn't.
Yeah, and it kind of works out here for at least Delphin, given the fact that the finals ends up being in Osaka, which does an insane number. And then now we have a trend here that when Delphin goes to Osaka, they end up selling out the entire building, if it's Michinoku Pro or not.
We'll come back to New Japan in a second. I want to go chronological here because there's also this note from the 5-9 Observer that Great Sasuke showed up at ringside on the WAR show in Sasuke's hometown of Iwate. This was on 4/26/94. After the match where Ultimo Dragon and Koji Ishii and Ricky upset Mil Mascaras and Dos Caras when Dragon pinned Dos, Sasuke got in the ring and challenged Dragon for his UWA middleweight title. Sasuke said that Dragon was his teacher and he wanted to wrestle him in a singles match. Dragon accepted the challenge, saying he was looking forward to the match because he said Sasuke is much better at wrestling than he is now, and the match was expected to take place in July. It does take place in July. We'll talk about it in just a second. The other stuff that occurs here, May 30th, 94 Observer, Dave has this note from the WWF section. We go back there, and it is the thing I was questioning earlier. Jinsei Shinzaki, based on his showing at the Japanese tour, was offered a spot to come in. So you see in May of 94, 1 year and 2 months after this promotion was formed, they are chipping away, they being the wrestling world at large, chipping away at one of Michinoku's top stars.
Yeah, and when you consider the fact that Shinzaki didn't even debut as Shinzaki until the summer, that this is less than a year of the Jinsei Shinzaki character, and he's already getting poached.
Yes, it's crazy. But, he is, again, he is, I would say, I'm going to talk about the biggest winner of this project so far in just a moment, but I would put Shinzaki as the number 2 big winner of this rewatch, as a guy who I just did not realize was as good as he was. Also from that same Observer, we get this note that on the 5/17 FMW show in Iwate that had Taka versus Genjin in the opener, Great Sasuke challenged Onita to a barbed wire match. I'm going to put a pin in that, Mike. I'm going to continue on these notes, and then we'll react to all of this. Dave also notes that the next Michinoku Pro Tour is from 6/14 to 6/26, with Sasuke defending his independent junior title against Ricky Fuji, and the Calgary Promotions Rocky Mountain Wrestling North American title will be decided in a singles match with Fuji and Terry Boy. He also continues saying that WAR is holding a one-night tournament to crown new World Six-Man Tag Team Champions on June 30th. This was Tenryu's idea because he was once NWA Six-Man Champions with the Road Warriors and All Japan. That stuff was awesome. And Dave notes that the trios will consist of teams like Tenryu, Animal Hamaguchi, and Koki Katahara, as well as Dos Caras, Owen Hart, and Brett Como. And
Thunderbird Brett Como?
The Thunderbird Brett Como, the man who was not Darkness Dragon, even though some people thought he was. That was Kness. When Darkness Dragon debuted, some people thought it was Brett Como. It was not. and Great Sasuke, Sato, and Ultimo Dragon. This would not take place. We'll get to this in a minute, but Sato gets hurt and he misses this show. So a lot to unpack there. You see, again, the relationship with New Japan is very good. The relationship with FMW is generating one possible huge last match. And then you still have this relationship with Sasuke and Ultimo and WAR, and you start to see their claws in that promotion more and more.
Yeah, and first off, I want to be in the locker room when they decided the finish of Koji Shinriki and Ultimo versus Mil Mascaras and Dos Caras.
Fucking awesome. I'm so bummed we don't have that match.
Yeah, no. I mean, does Mil and Dos even know who Ishinriki is? Like, do they just go like, oh, that's Asai and his friend? Okay, we'll do the business for Asai, but not that former sumo guy.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, but it's interesting, like, at this point that there's still like this attempt to keep this thread between Michinoku and FNW, and of course, like the whole thing is that you have this independent junior heavyweight title that Sasuke won the tournament and is still walking around with, and that's where you have like the situations with like Ricky Fuji. But man, I his links to Calgary, and I've never heard of Rocky Mountain Wrestling.
Nor have I.
Yeah. Just like that, definitely just making up a title in a promotion right there. But it's fascinating because like as the independent wrestling world landscape really started to explode over these kind of years, it at least like at this time, like the acts that now are essentially bankable for any promotion, Sasuke has now moved himself into that equation just like within like the last 3 months.
It's what's so interesting is, you know, look, maybe if the J Cup never happens, maybe there's this universe where Michinoku and FMW coexist for a very long time, and it leads to great growth for Hayabusa. And, you know, by the mid and late 90s, Masato Tanaka becomes a key figure in Michinoku. Maybe it all works out okay. But you see how quickly things change, especially given this note in the Observer. This is from June 10th when Dave writes, because of WAR's close alliance now with FMW, don't expect any more cooperation with New Japan. So Junichiro Tenryu, Ultimo Dragon, etc. won't be working these major shows anymore. So you have Tenryu, who's a huge part of New Japan 92, 93. Ultimo was certainly a guy that it seemed like they wanted to feature every chance they get. And yet they link up with FMW, and it costs them their New Japan relationship. And you see Sasuke, who is doing, you know, James Bond level laser jumping and avoiding getting stung, where he can now be a push act in his home promotion. He can be a push act in the New Japan Juniors division. He is now floating out the idea of wrestling Onita, which obviously we'll talk more and more about over the next few episodes. So he's got the top dog left in FMW. And in WAR, you know, a promotion that I think a lot of people hold near and dear to their hearts, myself included, but there's a lot of junk on those WAR shows. And he's positioned himself not against Tenryu, because it wouldn't make sense from a size perspective, but positioned himself against Ultimo, who is the other guy who was seemingly permanently protected in that promotion. So he's not only working with all of these other groups, you see that he is a pushed act, capital A, capital P, a push act in all of these promotions that all, I think we look back historically as this being a really hot time for independent wrestling in Japan.
Right, yeah, and I think that like one of the big things of this project is like our reappraisals of some of these guys now 31 years later, and I think there has to be like a definite point that has to be made in a big credit to Sasuke whenever like certain discussions are to be said about, oh, Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame or situations like this greatest wrestler ever or well, what have you. But like if you are judging people as draws in 1994, and when you're trying to look at someone's career and do lists like the Gordy list to try to put people in the neat kind of boxes, the reason why everyone brought in Sasuke is because he was able to sell tickets at this point, and especially with the amount of stuff that's happening and how fractured it is, the fact that he has become like a bona fide draw, I think kind of has gotten ignored over time. And especially the idea that now 4 promotions are banking on him to bring in people throughout with disparate fan bases when you consider that era F&W fan base versus the Tenryu Dead Enders who will support him to get to kind of the end of the years versus New Japan versus home Michinoku Pro. I don't think people, at least maybe internationally, have now correctly appraised how important and how big of a star great Sasuke was, at least coming out of the Super J Cup.
Well, let's look at this from the perspective of mid-June 1994, because we're just about to get to the two big New Japan matches that I think are the perfect cherries on top of the J Cup. But you have the Korakuen sellout in February. You have Big Show, his first Shinzake singles match that does a really respectable number back in their home territory shortly after that. Then you go to J Cup. That show sells out, basically as soon as tickets go on sale, and it's the creation of Liger, and you have to give Liger top billing on that. But given everything we know, everything we've talked about in these notes, it would be foolish to pretend that Sasuke wasn't a reason that some of those tickets sold. And then you have the fact that they run Tokyo 2 weeks after that. All of those tickets were sold out before the J Cup even happened. They were sold out off of the buzz and the strength of the February Korakuen show. And then we go through all of those May notes where, again, just to reposition here, he sets up a match with Onita that we know is going to happen at some point later down the line. He is working top junior billing with Ultimo Dragon. And at a time, that is commercially and critically revered for the New Japan Junior division, all of these observer notes that we've read and that we're going to read are Liger wants to make Sasuke a star. Liger wants to make Delphin a star. Liger wants to make Dictogo Sato a star. And all of that stuff is happening, and we're only halfway through the year. There's giant Sasuke matches that we haven't even gotten to, but you see just, again, the growing influence of Michinoku Pro on the wrestling world. None greater, by the way, than June 13th, 1994, Liger versus Super Delphin, and then 2 days later, June 15th, 1994, this brilliant New Japan versus Michinoku Pro 8-man tag team match. Mike, let's start with Liger versus Delphin, the finals of the Super Juniors that year. You have the floor.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that we kind of alluded to, but now we need to talk in full force here. Delphin is such a hometown star, and that truly colors this match in a way that Delphin is still as firmly a Naruto as he's always been, but he's in a crowd and he's in his hometown of Osaka that was firmly behind him at a lot of junctures that he has to be cognizant of it, and he decides, well, I need to go mask grip Liger because this is the only way I'm going to get some booze in this building. And it just really, the Jushin Thunder Liger has gotten his flowers, and they're all well deserved, and reappraising his work, the Michinoku guys in the summer and spring of 1994. He has another incredible match with someone from Michinoku Pro, and you see him at some of the most fun Liger where he is turning into an absolute prick because this asshole in his hometown is trying to get the crowd away from cheering him by doing mask rips. And this just absolutely rules as a match. It's smooth, and this is all not even to say that when the Dolphin clutch near fall happened towards the end after the DDT in the floor, I knew that Liger won this match, but I completely bought that near fall. And I was like, holy shit, Super Dolphin has won Best of the Super Juniors in front of his hometown fans while wearing a half Jushin Thunder Liger costume to be even more of a prick. And it's so much fun. The idea that I was a little underwhelmed with what we kind of got out of Delphin just because he had to eat that quick upset from Gato to make the booking work here. But this performance from him, he is easily my favorite guy coming out of this project, at least through the first 18 months of content that we have gone through. Super Dolphin is just such a sublime heel at what he does, and especially the way that he is able to get up with his work to stick with Liger at his peak is really admirable. This match absolutely just destroys. I think I like this match. Maybe it's such a different match case, but there's an argument that people can make that this match was better than Liger's first match with Sasuke, and I would entertain that argument. But I adored this. This was just really special wrestling, and a lot of it is the fact that you had Delphin in his hometown, and I feel like that kind of becomes the third man in the ring throughout this match.
This might be looked at as a cop-out, but if I was going to rank the three biggest winners of this project so far, I would have Delphin at number 3. I would have Shinzaki at number 2. And just based on the stuff that we've watched for the last 2 episodes, Jushin Thunder Liger doesn't need me to say that he's one of the all-time greats.
Right,
But,
yeah.
but like we've talked about on Voice Gate episodes, I think those days, but also especially, some of the modern Dragon episodes we have is because of the New Japan copyright issue where people are not discussing, sharing, or watching the history of New Japan in the same way that they are for other promotions, it is becoming evident that a lot of people who might know ball and might enjoy wrestling, might enjoy a show like this, might not know the hits of Jushin Thunder Liger in the same way that hardcore fans a decade ago or 2 decades ago might have. And also, living in a real time, Liger's retirement tour was so awkward and so weird, and I don't know the full story behind that. And I don't want to say it soured me on Liger, but it's not like this guy left with all of us going like, he's the man, that's our guy, Jushin Thunder Liger, he's the best. And so it's probably been about 5 years since I've really sat down and watched a bunch of Liger stuff. And I got to tell you, Mike, this Jushin Thunder Liger is pretty good.
Yeah, it's just like, I think that first when we talk about that New Japan wrap up, the amount of stuff that was like tied in at like Dead Ender Minoru Suzuki's time, like that colors it a lot. But it's just incredible. Like if we talk about at least his 1994, the stuff that we've selected for those days to watch of his case, like his batting average star rating wise for me is about like 4.6. Like it's all phenomenal stuff, and it's all so different. Like you take the match they had against Sasuke at J-Cup, and that's a match where arguably the story kind of was Sasuke proving himself and surviving Liger by throwing his body at him. And you contrast that where he has to kind of get down in the muck with Super Dolphin. Like you're facing the Joker in Gotham. You're facing the guy on his home turf, and he's like and he's outright taunting you, and he has to like kind of power through that. And yeah, Jushin Thunder Liger, like we always like he's treated as Kanonev's one of, if not the best super junior heavyweights of all time. But seeing it at this time, especially as kind of like a guest star into this series, has been a real phenomenal treat. And it really kind of shows how he himself elevated these guys. Like you know how much I've been loving Super Dolphin throughout this series. Like how powerful is he coming out of Osaka in June of 1994? Like I'm going to be excited to see how that all progresses after this, just from the boost that Sasuke got. I'm now interested in seeing in the boost that Delphin gets.
I just think it's so interesting that in the J-Cup, he lets Sasuke do all of the Sasuke stuff. I don't want to say it's a Sasuke match, but that's really because I don't think he had a formulaic singles match at that point in his career, that him being Sasuke. But he hits all of the high spots, or at least he attempts all the high spots, and Liger works the perfect foil. And this really does feel canonically just as much like a Michinoku Pro match as it does a New Japan match. The character traits of Delphin that had been honed over the last 15 months by this point, and even further when you go back to Universal, it all feels true to the way that he wrestles Liger. And I forget if I had said this or not, but I had never seen this match before. This was the first time I had watched it. And I was really blown away by the fact that by the fact that Delphin was able to hang with Liger on this level, but also that Liger let him have a Delphin match. Like you said, they had to get in the mud. They had to wrestle around in this really intriguing way. And it's a match that doesn't necessarily resemble, over the last 15 years, the Super Junior finals of great. It's not O'Reilly and Kushida. This isn't a Ricochet match. This is something different, something more character heavy. I would label it as very good, not great, but it's a mind-blowing match that is worth watching, because you see, and I think this is the other crucial thing, is This is true of the FMW relationship. It's mostly true of the WAR relationship, and it's especially true of the New Japan relationship, is not only are they putting these Michinoku guys in a chance to succeed, the Michinoku guys are then knocking it out of the park. And history is likely drastically different if Sasuke lays an egg in J-Cup and if Delphin doesn't bring it here. But luckily for us, they clearly rise to the occasion.
Isn't Delphin's Liger costume so cool in this match too?
Yeah, it's incredible.
They don't make wrestlers like Super Dolphin anymore, and we're a lot for the worse because of that. Man, I love this. I was 4.5 stars, but that might be my Super Dolphin goggles now fully on at this point.
No, I mean I would go 3 3/4 on it, so it's not that big of a difference. It is the match that followed this a mere 2 days later, and I want to talk about this match, and then I'll get into some of the Observer stuff that followed. But 2 days later, they are back in New Japan. It is June 15th, and it is an 8-man tag team match of Jushin Thunder Liger, El Samurai, Shinjiro Otani, and the Great Ishizawa against Great Sasuke, Taka Michinoku, Sato, and Shiryu. Mike, who is Ishizawa for those that might not be familiar with that name?
I am sad to report that it's Kanokushin.
There's a wrestler we're going to talk about a little bit later, and I am not being hyperbolic when I say this. It's the single best match of that wrestler's career. We cover one of those on this episode. Is this the single greatest match of Kendo Kashin's career?
You know, at least for me, yeah.
You know what? It's his top-rated match on Cage Match. That's really funny. I'm just now looking at that. I did not set that up like that, but that is really funny.
For once, the inmates and me are on the same page. You know,
let me not to do a full deep dive on Kashin. Is he in? Oh, he's not in that match. I thought maybe there was this match that surfaced like 10 years ago. And it was Kanemoto and Minoru Tanaka against Otani and Takaiwa from June 25th, 2000, New Japan Korakuen Show. And I feel like
peak junior stars.
Yeah, and I feel like nobody had seen it until like 2014. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I feel like it was like a thing when that match was found. And that is one of the best junior tags I've ever seen. And I thought maybe he was in that, but he is not. He is on that show. Teaming with Negro Casas against El Samurai and Shinya Makabe, which I'm sure was not as good as the main event tag on that show, which was splendid. So,
Case, I just want to jump in and say, for people who are charting my mental descent, I am holding my tongue so much because Koji Kanemoto did a reunion as junior stars at GLEAT a couple weeks ago, and I finally saw it.
You know, look, OJ ran for those yards. Kanemoto got those star ratings. Let
me tell you,
I judge you more for subscribing to the GLEAT YouTube channel than I do for you enjoying a Koji Kanemoto match.
He beat the shit out of JD Lee.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. I forget what exactly he got in trouble for. I'm sure that wasn't awesome, but Kanemoto as a wrestler is fucking awesome.
Yeah. An artist, I guess. There. Yeah, this match, Ishizawa is like really shrimpy, and he's wearing like it's very clear he just got out of his young lion phase, because it's like it's the classic first set of gear after you've been in black tights for 6 years. You know, like and it's such like a 1990s thing. So. We talked about this, and or you talked about how Liger really targeted the Michinoku Pro guys, and we talked a little bit about this last episode with Hayabusa. But before we get kind of deep into this match, I have a little aside about stuff that like I tried to find this match on this tour, because I was going to like go like, Case, we need to add this in here just because this was an event that happened, because there are Michinoku Pro guys throughout this Best of the Super Junior tour. So it's not just the guys in the tournament. You would have guys like Shiryu and also notably Terry Boy show up in the tournament. And last episode, we talked about how Hayabusa in his debut was so terrified that his history as a student wrestler was going to be revealed, and like that Riki Choshu was going to just throw him immediately out of the building for that. There was an instance of kind of a level of that happens on this tour, but also I feel like a little bit of like the push and pull of the Michinoku Pro guys getting highlighted, because there was I could not find the match case, but Terry Boy did a New Japan show, and he was at least at the time one of the few publicly known student wrestlers, and him and Shinjiro Otani got into it during the match. like leading onto the story leading up into this match. So Otani has had, like, when we're talking about the New Japan side, and yeah, this is the best Kendo Kashin match. This has also been like a time period where like Otani finally makes good with the Michinoku Pro guys after this. But you do kind of feel like a little bit of a pull of him of getting a little bit overshadowed by these Michinoku Pro guys. And he definitely, I don't know if it was all settled by this match in Budokan, but it definitely kind of felt a little bit with Otani that he was a little bit more pointed towards these guys than one would think.
Well, it's what made Otani so special all those years. That match, that was 6-1-94, Samurai Liger, Otani, and Ishizawa against Sato, Shiryu, Taka, and Terry Boy. According to Cage Match, that was from Sendai. That made TV, but I've never seen it. You couldn't find it. There was a match on...
I had to hunt down stuff for this tour. Like there was a Dolphin Taka match I saw that I meant to watch before tonight that from the tour that I had to go and hunt down to find. Like some of the stuff made tape, but is out there. I haven't been able to find.
There's a Black Tiger, Wild Pegasus, and Super Delphin versus El Samurai, Jushin Thunder Liger, and Taka Michinoku match from 6/14. That was not televised. That is a real bummer because I would have liked to have seen that. But we do get this match, which is televised. And this, as I keep an ongoing spreadsheet that I guess I should probably publicize and put in the Discord at some point of, all the essential viewing of Michinoku Pro, both in the promotion and out of it, with all the Michinoku guys during this time period. As by the end of this podcast series, I would like to have a master record of all the Michinoku worth watching. This is as good as it gets. I mean, this match to me is a complete work of art. It is not going to wind up, being one of the 10 best Michinoku related matches that we watch, but it will be one of my 10 favorite matches that we watch for this entire project. I found every second of this match to be absolutely brilliant, from the opening sequence with Liger and Sato that made me realize that nobody knows how to do a good arm drag anymore, to all of the violence that Otani brings, to the continued growth of Taka Michinoku, which is something we're going to hit on as this episode continues. It is a masterful 8-man, and you start to see the flair and the flavor of Michinoku Pro at their best in matches like this.
Yeah, and I don't know if you would rate this as one of those formative Lucha Rest matches case, but there was a certain kind of chaos that happened, especially when you led to the point where I take note of these every single time because I feel like it's going to become later. It's going to be important when we get to episode 18 when we're talking about 1998 Sasuke, but he does one of the most insane topes where he clears the ring and he lands on the broadcast equipment table.
Okay, so let's talk about this spot because I have this written down in my notes and I want to do justice to this because it's
insane.
This is a 12-minute match. This probably has about 9 minutes into it, where this is right after, by the way. So Liger and Sasuke face off in the ring, and it feels like a thing. The people recognize that this is a J-Cup rematch at this point, and they respond accordingly. And Liger hits his wheel kick, that capo kick that's super drag.
It's so gnarly. Yeah,
he hits that on Sasuke, dumps Sasuke to the floor, and then hits a power bomb on the floor. That cues a Shiryu comeback. And this match, I think, I would highly doubt that Hyo, the current day Dragon Gate wrestler, is influenced by Shiryu, because I've never heard that mentioned. But yeah, Shiryu and Hyo are very, very similar. They're guys that have superb hot tag comebacks, and they're more charisma than they are skill. But Shiryu has a very heel-like performance in this match. So,
this is, I think, Shiryu's best performance to date. In
far
this
and
match.
away.
He was
Close.
excellent. Yeah.
So,
welcome to the list, Shiryu. We've been waiting for you.
So you get that Liger Sasuke spot. Shiryu comes back and starts to clean house, and this is the sequence of events. Shiryu hits a gorgeous tope on Ishizawa. El Samurai then immediately hits the ropes, and he hits a tope onto Shiryu. Sato comes off the ropes, and he does his step-up flip dive, where he goes 1 foot on the middle rope inside of the ring, 2 feet on the top rope, and then does a somersault flip to the floor. He does that onto El Samurai. Liger then goes to the top rope crossbody on Sato. Taka Michinoku then follows that up. He does the Spaceman plancha dive, the one that Ricky Choshu said made him an alien. He does that onto Liger. Otani then follows that with a springboard crossbody onto Taka, and
Which is the most violent looking crossbody possible.
Disgusting. It's absolutely foul that Otani would do that to another human being. And that clears the way for Sasuke to do this plancha dive onto Otani. If you listen to our Dragon Gate USA series, it's very reminiscent of a Davey Richards Dragon Gate USA era Tope Suicida, in which he makes contact with seemingly everything but the guy that he's diving on, and yet it still looks violent and impactful, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
It's just like this level of Sasuke's destruction that he does to himself in 1994 is no wonder, like, now 2025 eyes, like, he wrestles and looks like someone who is wrestling like 30 years older than they are at times, because like the sheer violence that he puts himself through in this match, and off of what happened in J-Cup and then what's going to be happening to him throughout the rest of this year, I find it important to point out each of these times just because how brutal it is. And it's become like a real core thing about Sasuke, and a certain appreciation for her is just like, it's not the ability, it's not the power, but it's the sheer human willingness to kind of be like, I will survive this and you will be worse off. And eventually that toll kind of kicks up with you, but that'll be something we'll talk about when we get to 1998 in like episode 30 or so.
Yeah, that's just about. That's kind of where we've got that slotted. So, look, if you've never seen it, 6/15/94, the New Japan 8-man, will obviously provide a link, but it's not as good to me as the Cork and Hall 6-man from February, which I think is sort of peak Lucharesu wrestling. This is not a foundational Lucharesu match. You said that yourself. I mean, this is what makes Liger so special. And I said this publicly a few years ago when Hiromu was doing, all these stops and all these other promotions, but he would go in and be Hiromu. And I was like, how did we not learn from Liger, whether it's here with him bringing Michinoku Pro guys to feast on, or Liger and Noah in the early 2000s, or Liger and Osaka Pro in the mid 2000s? Like, there was real promotional pride and promotional rivalry at stake. And you feel that, this is New Japan meets Michinoku Pro. It's not a Michinoku Pro match with New Japan guys. It's really interesting from that dynamic.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of added a little level of spice to it. But we end the match with the sides all brawling, clearing the ring, leaving Liger and Shiryu for an avalanche brainbuster to get the win for the New Japan side. And Sasuke and Liger immediately afterwards start exchanging words, which makes sense given what is built to and what's going to be the next match we cover on this episode.
On the 627 Observer from 1994, Dave said that pretty much everybody agreed that the match that stole the show was the New Japan versus Michinoku Pro 8-man with all those guys. So continuing the theme of not only is it working, domestically in Japan at this point with all the Michinoku Pro guys coming in, but you're starting to see more and more international praise. Dave would write the week before, this is the June 20th, 1994 Observer, and I think this is a testament to Liger and his foresight, and again, the value that Michinoku Pro is bringing all of Japan at this point. When writing about the Liger versus Delphin Super Junior finals, Dave writes, just as the Super J Cup elevated Michinoku Pro's great Sasuke's position with the casual wrestling fans of Japan when he defeated Liger in the semifinals before losing in the finals, the new star, in quotations, created by this tournament was Delphin, who was in first place in the tournament much of the way, and also up the level of Otani, who, along with Satoshi Kojima, who wasn't in the tournament, is the best of New Japan's younger wrestlers, as he scored upsets over Pegasus and Tiger. So Dave is complimenting both Delphin and Otani. Liger, he continues, who was instrumental in putting together the two tournaments together, wanted to elevate Michinoku Pro wrestlers Sasuke, Delphin, Jinsei Shinzaki, and Sato to a top level to create new viable challengers for his IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. Shinzaki appears to no longer be a part of the plan since he's headed to the WWF in the fall, but Sasuke, Delphin, and Sato will probably work with Liger starting at the G1 Climax tournament at Sumo Hall in August. So that leaves us with, one, just the idea of Shinzaki being in the mix had he not done the WWF tour, which is really interesting. But, Sasuke, Delphin, Sato, Liger knew how to pick them.
Yeah, gosh. If we're talking about like the different universe where 123 Kid works Michinoku Pro, 94 Shinzaki versus Liger should have been Liger dropping the belt to Shinzaki and having to build himself up for the Dome and then picking it back up then.
Yeah,
That's what I would
it
do.
feels like with Liger's instincts that the Shinzaki character is something that he could have gotten a lot of mileage out of. That almost
Right.
The blueprint was laid with the two Sasuke matches, and I think Liger just would have taken that up even another notch.
Right, yeah, and then you have Sato there that, I mean, come on, 1994 Sato versus Liger would have been the best match out of the four of them. Like that would have been the match that the copyright strikes would have made us want to reassess how we do internet distribution of New Japan, just because how amazing that match could have been.
Going to the gym can be discouraging, especially if you're putting in the work but barely seeing changes. But with Tonal, you can actually see your progress with every workout. Tonal provides the convenience of a full gym and the expertise of a personal trainer anytime at home with one sleek system. Designed to reduce your mental load, Tonal is the ultimate strength training system, helping you focus less on workout planning and more on getting results. No more second-guessing your technique. Tonal gives you real-time coaching cues to dial in your form and help you lift safely and effectively. After a quick assessment, Tonal sets the optimal weight for every move and adjusts in 1 pound increments as you get stronger, so you're always challenged. Tonal lets you choose from a variety of expert-led workouts, from strength to arrow hit to yoga and mobility, to keep you coming back for more. For a limited time, go to Tonal.com to get $500 off your Tonal purchase, plus a free 4-year warranty. That's Tonal.com for $500 off, plus a free 4-year warranty. Tonal.com.
Luckily, we get that in just a few years. We'll cover that in a future episode. We go to what we are labeling as Michinoku Pro over before it began on the June 27th, 1994 Wrestling Observer newsletter. Perhaps you clicked on this episode and you went, wait a minute, why is it called Sasuke Retires? This doesn't make any sense. I have seen Great Sasuke wrestle since 1994, but we are calling it that because of this Observer entry in which Dave writes, in what came to a huge shock to everyone, the great Sasuke, who through his performance on 4/16 at the Super J Cup, elevated himself to being one of the hottest young wrestlers in Japan and perhaps the top flying wrestler in the world, announced an impending retirement on Sunday. Sasuke, 24, is the top drawing card for Michinoku Pro and is the son of the group's owner. I'm going to pause here just to quickly editorialize. I'm going to pat ourselves on the back, Mike. We did such a good job of explaining the lore and the creation of Michinoku Pro in our first 2 episodes that I have largely ignored something that has since been proven false. And Dave does correct himself on future observers. Around this time, 93, 94, the belief was that Sasuke's father was the point man for the promotion, the money behind the promotion, and to some degree, the creative visionary behind the promotion. And Dave, again, he would correct himself later in 1994, so this isn't pile on Dave, but it came out that was false and that this was really all Sasuke's creation. And other than getting a small loan from his parents at the start of this promotion, everything here is Sasuke. So that's why Dave writes that. I want to keep that in here just as a quick note, that around this time it was believed that, Sasuke's, he is Michinoku Pro, but his dad is also pulling the strings behind the scenes. That is not true. Dave continues here that Michinoku Pro is a small regional office that promotes mainly in small towns in the Iwate prefecture of the Japanese northern island of Hokkaido. It would be in similar stature to Smoky Mountain in the United States, although it has run occasional shows out of its area, with the most successful being the 429 show at Tokyo's Otawar Gymnasium, which drew a sellout of 4,500 fans, a figure that has been frequently made mention of both here and in Japan because it was more than the WWF drew at the Yokohama Arena for the much-publicized Japan Mania show less than 2 weeks later. Sasuke's popularity peaked in Japan 2 weeks earlier at the Super J Cup at Tokyo Sumo Hall, where, appearing on the sold-out New Japan show, he stole the show with perhaps the greatest individual performance in the history of pro wrestling, a 4.5-star match against El Samurai, followed by a 4.75-star match with Jushin Liger, which he scored the upset win, before losing in the tournament finals to Wild Pegasus in a 5-star match that is expected to finish highly in Match of the Year balloting. Yes, go ahead. You have the floor. I have nothing else to add.
I just have a little anecdote to give you a little bit of a break here. So 21 years later, Dave would say Masaki Mochizuki had the greatest individual performance in the history of pro wrestling. I wonder how many times Dave has said that over the last 25 years.
Oh, not bad for these Lucharesu guys, huh?
Not bad whatsoever. It's like really like when you think about also the fact that Sasuke was 24 at this point is another just insane facet about this.
Dave would continue after the 619 Michinoku Pro Show, where Sasuke retained his independent junior heavyweight title that he won in the FMW MPW dual promotion tournament, beating FMW's Ricky Fuji. He announced that his retirement is impending and that he wanted to go out in a blaze of glory, so to speak, and that he wanted to finish up on a Michinoku show with an explosive barbed wire match against Atsushi Onita, and that it would be his retirement match. He said that after the match, he would take over from his father as president of Michinoku Pro. Because of Sasuke's age, there is a lot of thought that this is an angle. The previous night, after putting over Super Delphin in a six-man tag, Sasuke said that Delphin would now be replacing him as the top star in the promotion. Delphin's stock rose greatly this past month as he was coming off a second-place finish in the highly publicized New Japan Juniors tournament. However, he's not the flashy acrobatic performer that Sasuke is, and nobody feels that he is the top guy and he'll be able to draw in the same way that Sasuke did. In addition, Michinoku's top heel, Jinsei Shinzaki, is scheduled to go to the WWF. So there is much speculation as to the long-term prospects of this company.
Yeah, that is a lot. And I think that you have this aspect of, like, in 1994, we have to remind ourselves, we only really had one Atsushi Onita retirement at this point. So there was not, like, the immediate, oh my God, you had Onita has retired 7 times. Like, we can't trust anyone saying a retirement. So you have that aspect. And I mean, talking about the damage that he has already done to his body to this point, there could have been an argument with that there. Well, one thing also worth kind of talking about here, looking at the Observer results over this time period. Remember, at this time last year, Michinoku Pro was going like, well, we had that one show that had 43 people there, and basically everyone was like, well, that's it, we're done. And then Hamada told them, no, you can't do that as your pride of a professional wrestler. Over this tour, they have 3 houses that are listed as sellouts that are at or well over 1,000 or right at 1,000 at this point, when they were struggling the last year getting like 200, 300 people in this building. They sold out most of this tour that they would have, that all of this Sasuke buzz was happening around this time.
We've got an anecdote from Sasuke's book in just a second that will cover some of that attendance stuff as well. So, you know, just put yourself in the shoes of being in 1994 for a second, but with modern day technology, where you read that in the Observer and you can imagine a mournful 1994 edition of the Voices of Wrestling flagship podcast, in which people would begin throwing dirt on the grave of Michinoku Pro. Shinzake's leaving. Sasuke's going to retire. Nobody trusts Delphin. For as talented as this roster is, it's not like they have a lot of top of the line stars when you remove those 3 from the billing. And then we go to the July 4th, 1994 Observer, where Dave says nobody seems to be taking Great Sasuke's claims of imminent retirement seriously, as his speech last week where he brought up the subject was only reported by the tabloids and not even by the wrestling magazines. However, Sasuke does want to put together a baseball stadium show against Atsushi Onita, and there has even been talk of a singles match against Antonio Inoki, and I am beyond devastated we never got that.
Even in 1994, Great Sasuke was a weird cat.
Very much so. But it is a thing where for a week it seemed like maybe that Michinoku Pro was going to be over before it even began. Also, from that Observer, this is important to note here as we get into the final bit of footage that we're going to talk about, you know, these last few matches. Michinoku Pro finished its latest tour on 6/26. For the last week of the tour, heel Super Delphin, after every main event, asked Taka Michinoku, the personal protege of Great Sasuke, to switch to be a heel and to be his partner. On the final night of the tour, Taka and Delphin shook hands and apparently will form a team. Sato also blew out his knee on that show and will be out of action for 2 months, which means he'll miss the 630 World Six-Man Tag Team Tournament that WAR is hosting, and he will be replaced on that team with Ultimo and Sasuke by Yuji Yoshikawa. Sato luckily would only miss a month, and he's actually back on the July 30th Michinoku Pro show that we're going to talk about here in just a second. The other note from that Observer, before I throw it back to you, Mike, for your thoughts on this, is that New Japan announced a singles match between Liger and the Great Sasuke, the man who is not retiring, on July 8th in Sapporo, and we'll talk about that here in just a second.
Important to note, Sapporo is, like, as a city, would be considered much bigger, even though it's in Hokkaido. than a lot of places that they were running in Iwate. But like this is again pulling a guy from Northeast, trusting him to have a big number there. Yeah, Sato's knee being blown out does not really affect us in the story, but it is kind of one of those things. Is like, oh, he was going to be in this tournament, and he probably would have won with Ultimo and Sasuke, but then his knee goes, and it's interesting that you have that Taka note as when we get into July 30th and talking about Taka in that match, but interesting time for the promotion. Their greatest fear seems to be abated / no one's taking it seriously, and we go immediately basically in our timeline to that match in Sapporo, Great Sasuke versus Jushin Thunder Liger.
Another match I had never seen before, which is funny. I was saying, when we talked about Liger versus Delph, and I go, I don't think a lot of people have seen the Great Liger matches, and here's two of them that I had never seen before. But Liger versus Sasuke, I think, is not quite as good as their J-Cup match. I did like this more than the Liger-Delphin match, and that is because of the physicality in this. You really feel like Liger wants to kill this man, and that Sasuke will do anything to kill himself in this match. The balance of the vicious Liger offense that is directed towards Sasuke, and then the vicious Sasuke offense in which if he crashes and burns, he's only inflicting pain on himself, is a really fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, and Hokkaido popped for him crashing and burning. Well, like now that's accepted as a part of the Sasuke experience. Is this guy's going to go for it? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And yeah, this was really just like a strong match. I think that the idea that like Sasuke kind of treats this almost like his own home turf adds a little bit to it, but not that same element that I think kind of captured me in the Osaka match. But it's just really like it. In a way, it's not the greatest hits, but you do kind of have like that building off of the last few matches, and it did kind of very much feel like you had this huge avalanche Fisherman Buster for the finish, and it at least like at the time coming out of this match, it did kind of feel like all right, you're 1-1, but I don't really like Liger kind of definitively got the win here in a way that like if you're looking at like reestablishing aura or getting it back, like it was pretty convincingly so, but it was done in just such a way that you kind of think like, oh wait, if Sasuke like hits this, or if one of these spots goes better for Sasuke, maybe he's able to catch Liger the same way he did in Sumo Hall. But I enjoyed this one, but I think for me it just like having this match and seeing especially like the toll on Sasuke, that was kind of like my big takeaway from it.
It felt like an epic, which is it felt like the proper aura, to steal a modern day phrase. This was the only appropriate way to follow up their J-Cup match, which was something a little bit more rugged, a little bit more heated, and yet it felt even bigger than when they wrestled in Sumo Hall. I really liked this. I would go 4 stars on this.
Yeah, no, I was at about 4 as well on this, and it just felt like it was a deliberate, also a little bit from Sasuke, like deliberately trying to go for him and being like, oh, I'm going to go for the arm and this is going to work out. But as soon as that all fails, we know what Sasuke is going to start doing, and that's throwing his body around.
They certainly set up some arm work at the beginning of this match that I don't think it entirely paid off, but also comparing that to the Ultimo Dragon match that we're about to review, which I thought completely fell apart. I'll certainly take this. The only other note I have here is after the match, which Sasuke lost, Sasuke issued a challenge to Liger to appear on a major Michinoku Pro card, putting up his IWGP Junior title against Sasuke's Independent Junior title. The entirety of the next episode is dedicated to that match and why it didn't happen.
Yeah, no. So it did feel like that they were going to try to do the rubber match in Michinoku Pro, but we'll talk next time about that. Yeah, let's get into this war match. It was in Sumo Hall. It was the 2nd anniversary show for Pro Wrestling War for the UWA World Middleweight title, Ultimo Dragon versus his junior Great Sasuke. And after the first time that we saw the two together, I guess like in a match, the big question I had going into this is, will Ultimo respect his junior? And instead what we had was more of a it was more competitive in the match that or at least it was more, Ultimo was more into it in the match that he had against them in War the year before, but it did also, in a couple ways, did kind of see the difference and the big divergence points between two of the big forefathers of Japanese lucha wrestling in my mind.
This match was a mess. I don't know. It's a weird thing with Ultimo, and in that I find parts of his career to be grossly underrated, and I don't think he gets the respect that he deserves from a Segunda Caída type crowd or a pro wrestling only type crowd at times. And then he has matches like this, and I go, oh, was Ultimo Dragon ever good? I mean, this is a long match, and it is a long collection of spots that I don't feel like necessarily flow together. Now, part of that could be that, you know, Sasuke, nobody's confusing Sasuke for Dean Malenko. You know, two praised junior heavyweights in 1994 approaching wrestling a completely different way. So I get that to some degree, but this was Sasuke doing a move, and then Ultimo doing a move, and then Sasuke doing a move, and then Ultimo doing a move. And sometimes the Sasuke move would be really impressive, and sometimes the Ultimo move would look really cool. And yet, for 22 minutes, I never felt like there was a connective tissue in this match. If you go back to the WAR tag that Sasuke worked earlier in the year with Sato against Ultimo, there was the note in the Observer that Ultimo did not want these indie guys showing him up. Whether that was storyline or not, I do not know, but in the same way that Liger was so giving to Sasuke and to Delphin and let them do their thing and let them shine, I felt like Ultimo was on his heels being overprotective in his home territory, and it really hurt the match as a result.
And I think that that's an argument that could be made about Ultimo in general.
Completely.
So, that Ultimo plays up or plays down to if he thinks it's worth his time, frankly. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is a little bit of modern Ultimo Dragon coloring my perspective.
I don't think so. If you go back and look at the quotes we have and the information we have of even his time in Universal, there became a point where he wasn't getting paid, which certainly doesn't help. But I think he kind of looked at the Universal roster as like, I'm better than all you guys. I'm gonna go elsewhere.
And it's kind of a shame when you contrast that, at least through 1995, the way that Sasuke looked at Ultimo, which was much more of the traditional, oh, he is my senior and I respect him for that. And, he did the K-Brada and I wanted to do the K-Brada because it was such a special thing. And there definitely seems to be a tissue with Ultimo, or at least with Sasuke, that he's trying to get Ultimo's approval in a way, reading through Sasuke scores. I definitely think that that's an aspect of it. And I think with Ultimo also, how much of this do you think this match could have been different if Super J Cup did not happen the way it did? And especially in the way that Sasuke over 1994, and even if you want to consider the Anita stuff in 93, kind of made his name as like the flashy guy getting coverage, and then later on doing it on a big stage that I could very easily see, especially in 1994, even though that there seems to be a little bit more of a public acceptance of Sasuke by Ultimo, though still innately there seems to be a level of dismissiveness that I think can make a match like this kind of fall apart in that manner. I did like the fact that they did, knowing what Sasuke is and what Sasuke was in 94, they worked the Super J Cup match with Liger finish into it with the Ultra Hurricane Rana. And maybe that was like a little bit of having to play to that, and knowing that Ultimo pulled out of Super J Cup because he didn't want to take any falls there. There's a lot of open questions, I feel like, about Ultimo that kind of like this match kind of embodies in a lot of ways.
Two things there. One, just to talk about a spot that I liked in the match. I did like how they traded Asai moonsaults, where Sasuke does one and goes over the barricade and is completely nuts, and then Ultimo, before they get back in the ring, battles back and then hits a crazy Asai moonsault of his own. I like that they mirrored those spots. I thought that was cool.
The top rope drop kick before that Asai moonsault that Sasuke took was like one of the gnarliest bumps that Sasuke has taken over the last few months.
There would perhaps be no greater match to benefit from watching this match as GIFs or even a highlight video rather than the full match, because there was awesome stuff individually in this match. I just didn't like the way that it came together at all. in terms of, the Ultimo Sasuke relationship, I mean, we can speculate because we see this in sports all the time, and you have to think about, let's remove 87 through 90 from the equation and what we know about the way that Ultimo was lauded as a worker when he was in Mexico, pre-Ultimo, pre-Universal. Let's just take what we know about Ultimo from 1991 to 1993, which is that he becomes the highest paid foreign wrestler, more so than Muta in WCW, when he jumps from the UWA in Mexico to CMLL in Mexico, and, makes an absurd amount of money. Because of that, he has to leave Universal, Hamada's group in Japan. He goes to SWS. He's got this amazing gimmick. He's got this flashy costume. He is the junior heavyweight of the era. And I think if you would ask anybody in 1991 or 1992 what Japanese junior heavyweight is going to dominate the decade, the answer, if it wasn't Liger, was going to be Ultimo Dragon. And you see that sometimes in sports where, in the NBA we'll go, oh, that's going to be the guy. And then 2 years later, it's like, what happened to the guy? Oh, there's this new guy. And Sasuke completely steals his thunder. And knowing what we know about Ultimo Dragon, but also just knowing what we know about Human Instinct, if I was Ultimo, I would be pissed if I had no relation to Sasuke. I can't imagine how pissed I'd be if it was the person that I trained, my junior, my former young boy, doing all of these things and stealing all of the media coverage that once belonged to me. And it's not like Ultimo was washed at this point. This is when everybody thought that Ultimo would be in the prime of his career, and to some degree that he was. But Sasuke still, when we talk about mid-90s junior heavyweight wrestling in Japan, not factoring in Ultimo's WCW stuff, we will always point to Sasuke before we point to Ultimo.
Yeah, no, I think those are two really good points to be made with this. Worth noting on this show, that 6-man tournament final was Atsushi Onita, Crusher Bam Bam Bigelow, and Junichiro Tenryu defeating Ashura Hara, Jinsei Shinzaki, and John Tenta. Friend of ours and everyone's, Masaki Mochizuki, loses in the first round.
Could not find the finals of this tournament, or else I would have thrown that in this equation, because I think that is a fascinating looking matchup that I'm sure exists. But the YouTube upload is just the Ultimo and Sasuke match. So I did not hunt too hard for that 6-man tag. One quick note from the Observer on August 1st, 1994, is that following this match, it is expected that Onita will have a singles match against Great Sasuke on the Michinoku Pro Show on September 25th. They would have a match. It would not be on September 25th. More of that in the next episode. The final note I have before we get to the actual Michinoku proper show that we're going to review here is from Sasuke Soars, the book from 1995. And Sasuke talks about the changing in attendance between the June tour, which is the Chagu Chagu Lucha Kids tour, and the July tour, which was called How About Great Sasuke, the Michinoku Pro Tour.
I love it. I love it so much. How about Great Sasuke? Well, how about him? That he's the man on everyone's lips right now.
Think about it. Like, so we're recording this June 2025. I've been saying since January that I'm waiting for Noah and this Team 2000X thing with Ozawa to fall apart. If you're listening to this years from now, who knows? I'm gonna bet on the side that Pro Wrestling Noah ruins something they have going for them. But Ozawa is the singular draw for that promotion. If in July of 2025 they were going to run a tour that said, "How about that Ozawa?" Wouldn't you and I applaud that as good business sense?
I would love it. I think that would be perfect.
Exactly. So Sasuke writes in his book, he says, the Tohoku tour started again, and the number of customers visibly increased from the Chagu Chagu Lucha Kids tour event that began on June 14th. The average attendance exceeded the target number of 500 people, reaching 690, which is about 1.5 to 2 times the previous number. When we asked the customers why this was, most of them said that they had seen New Japan Super J-Cup on TV and had changed their views of Michinoku Pro. People who previously thought that we were no good because we were a minor local Tohoku organization saw us perform in the New Japan ring and praised us, saying, "We're not bad." We then held a circuit of 33 matches entitled How About Great Sasuke from July to August in the summer. We attracted a total of 32,770 customers. Around this time, Michinoku Pro finally began to take a breather. Using Universal as a negative example, we finally saw the benefits of holding as many events possible while minimizing profits.
32,000 people across 33 shows.
That's, unfathomable in 1993 to think that they would have ever done that level of business.
Yeah, no, and they are put in a unique situation where the lead up to the 7:30 show, they start announcing that they're going to have members from the former Universal promotion, and this show becomes from Yahaba on July 30th, 1994, the How About Great Sasuke Tour UWA reunion. This one of the tour is released on commercial tape. We are using the commercial tape for this in case. It's interesting to see, especially with the 2025 eyes, and especially living past the era of like ECW One Night Stand and Torimon reunions. The fact that there was a UWA base reunion and it kind of was used as an excuse for them to book Gato, Jado, and Ultimo Dragon.
Yes, yeah. This show, I think up top, and it was a complete sellout, 2,700 fans in attendance, 7:30 in Yahaba. I certainly believe that number. I mean, this is a absolutely packed gymnasium that they run. You know, if they
much more packed than what we saw this gymnasium before with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it helps that you have Ultimo there, and the Universal reunion aspect would have been appealing to somebody like me in real time had I been there for that. The thing about this show, I'm curious, because we have the benefit of, yes, we're doing a Michinoku Pro rewatch, and some of this footage, especially a lot of the footage leading up to this specific show, say on this episode I had not seen before, but you and I both have an existence of Michinoku Pro, or an awareness rather, of Michinoku Pro in 95 and 96 and 97. We know, for all intents and purposes, what peak Michinoku Pro looked like. I think this is the start of peak Michinoku Pro. This show looks like the best of Michinoku Pro. It sounds like the best of Michinoku Pro. There's two utterly incredible matches on this show. This could change as we go along. Maybe I'll change my answer at some point. But if somebody was going to ask me, when does the peak of Michinoku Pro start? I think I'm saying July 30th, 1994.
Yeah, and I think, like, big picture wise, like, Shiryu's online at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Masato Yakashiji now has his like full-time gear that we see.
He's got the
in.
look. This is, for the rest of his time in Michinoku, this is what he would look like.
Yeah. So it does, in a way, feel like that the promotion has grown up in a manner, and you have that, like, also with the fact that you have Sasuke, as we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, at the peak of his powers, at least as of 1994. Delphin now is a national star. And then you have a show like this that you have now not just like your core roster, but then your foreigners. You have perhaps one of the best performances that we've seen so far from Kendo at this point, especially like an aged Kendo in that semi-main event. And just like from top to bottom, like you have a very complete show. And on this tape, you get this aspect of, okay, we've clipped the first three matches really, and then we are getting to everything just kicking off from that. And it's just one of the most fun shows that I think I've seen in recent years. And really, a lot of that is aided by the semi-main event, which is, I would put down as one of, we said this wasn't the case for the 8-man tags. This match, the semi-main event on this show, ends up being what I think is a similar blueprint to a Lucha Rest match, but one of the Lucha Rest matches based a little bit more towards the comedy side. And I feel like you see some certain things in this match that you would later see from your Ebisons and your Kubishino Caimans. Like it's such a strong match in that matter.
Save your thoughts on that semi-main event, because I want to talk about that match in depth. But let's start at the top of the card here. I'll hand it to you for Michinoku Pro, the reunion.
So the commercial tape started with an interview discussing Universal and a nice little opening that had photos and clips from Universal, contrasting them with their current personas. And this happens throughout the show. Everyone kind of gets one of those. And we miss Nahiro Hoshikawa versus Wellington Wilkins Jr., a time limit draw that was not on tape, but we're joined in a clipped match for Shiryu and Terry Boy versus Hanzo Nakajima and Masato Yakashiji. Terry gets the win over Yakashiji for the spinning toe hold, and a fun match that from what we saw, but a lot of it kind of was the progressing of Yakashiji and Terry Boy really loving his spinning toe hold.
Yeah, another guy who, we talked about the big winners on this project so far, and I would certainly certainly put Terry Boy in that group. But I would also say that this is now, we talked about this perhaps being the beginning of the peak of Michinoku Pro, and this is the beginning of Masato Yakashiji as we know it, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of like noting, like, Yakashiji's online. We've now gone from Leopardo Negro arguably being like one of the 2 or 3 best workers in the promotion to now basically being completely mitigated at this point. I would say.
Somebody that was passed by pretty quickly.
Yep. We have one of the first former Universal promo packages. This one for Infernal Kaoru, talking about her time at Universal and her here and now. And then we get another clipped match, Infernal Kaoru versus Chaparita Asari. It is a moonsault press for Kaoru, and another clipped match. Asari is someone that I always see the names of when I go through the footage, but I don't think I've ever like seen a whole lot of her. And she, at least in the terms of this kind of project, has a Sasuke-like vibe in that she just really like flies and throws her body around and gets like the big near fall with her Sky Twister press.
Yeah, I feel like I see both of these names often. With Kaoru being really tight with that entire Michinoku crew, and I guess she popped up more in '93 than she does in '94 because she wrestles Hamada's daughter on almost every show of that first tour. In my head, she appears in Michinoku more, but this is actually, I'm looking at her cage match right now. This is the last time that we see her, but she's a name that's around from the days of Universal more so than Michinoku Pro, but it's still somebody that I'm not entirely familiar with. And we get a very short version of this match with the clipping of it, but it's a match that I was left impressed by and maybe want to see more of these people.
Yeah, and Kaoru, I guess, at that time in '94, Arisen starts up, and that kind of gets her more towards the women's side, more into the Joshi side. I know she was doing some FMW at that point too, but it does seem like that she does then veer into Arisen and then ends up kind of more into that Joshi world there. We get the packages for Taka and Jado leading into their match. It's still a little clipped, but this is more complete match than the first two. Taka Michinoku versus Jado. Jado getting the win with the Super Frankensteiner over Taka, and a real. I feel like with Taka, I say this like every time we get a singles match with him, but I thought this was a real impressive performance from Taka here and playing into his resilience. Didn't get much of him being a heel though.
This is the best match of Jado's entire career. And
yeah, I feel that way too. Yeah,
but it's like it's not even hyperbolic. This is the best match of his career because he never really had, especially if we're talking singles matches, but even in tags, I don't know. I love this match to such a strong degree, and he doesn't have, in the same way that Gato has, say, the Prince Devitt match from 2013, which I think a lot of people know about if you don't know the lore. During the absolute peak of Devitt in New Japan. In terms of the momentum that he had, they were setting up a Devitt versus Okada title match, and to get that match, he had to wrestle Gato in a singles match in Cork and Hall, and it's just sublime pro wrestling. It's so good. Jado never has that. I mean, he doesn't really have much in his career, especially when he's not saddled by Gato. I mean, they've got a Noah tag from that juniors feud in the early 2000s that I like against Kikuchi and Kanemaru, but I would have this match on that level. I mean, this is a match in which you really start to see like, oh, Taka's becoming one of the best wrestlers in the world, and then Jado holds his own.
Yeah, and I feel like that Taka now is at like this level of complete that he's able to kind of play into Jado, just I get kind of big brothering him a bunch throughout the match. And I think that added an element to that. But like my big takeaway as we got like towards the finish is it goes this way for the next 3 matches. Yahaba is intense. Like the crowd
absolutely fired up,
molten for this. And it really, for me, like you had this apron suplex that was just like into a Satan Atomico that was just gnarly that led into it, and it just really rocked. Like I don't think I was 4 stars on this, and it would be hard for me to go up that high for it, but this is easy like a 3 3/4 stars match. And it's hard for me to think of Jado really doing much more compelling than this, because also within like WAR, like they kind of link Jericho up with Gato too. So Jato's a little bit cast aside by that as well.
No, I would put this right at 4. And, as you go through the cage match of Jado, one of his featured matches, his top rated matches is him and Masanobu Kuriso from one of the first FMW shows, which I've never seen that before. And then it's Danielson and Curryman against Gato and Jado from New Japan. And then, some wing stuff, and then some, prime Bushi Road era New Japan stuff that I remember. And I wouldn't put it on the level of this Taka match. I mean, I don't say that in jest. This is the best match of Jado's entire career. And it's largely a Taka match. I mean, you really start to see here the athleticism on display and the fact that he's putting it all together. But, if we were going to celebrate Jado, let's celebrate Jado here.
No, I hear you with that. We go into the retrospective segments with Sato and Super Dolphin. I do think it's kind of funny that Dick Togo, who has been basically bald since like 1997, he pops back to a full head of hair by this point. Like, it's not the mullet that he had, but he's pretty dang close. And then you had Dolphin, and that led us to the Dolphin core of Super Dolphin, Grand Nanawa, and Superboy versus Sato, Kendo, and Piloto Suicida. And at least for me, like, was the blowaway match of this this selection, the time in the timeline. I thought that this is a match that will resonate with me throughout the rest of the project.
It's the interesting thing that I find about this, because we're not the first people that have gone back and dissected this footage in the way that we have. But when I go back and I read deep dives on Pro Wrestling Only, or I think back to the matches that Ditch would host on the old Ditch site, these were the type of matches that weren't necessarily celebrated. And I don't know what it is about you and I, where we seem to get a kick out of these matches more so than other people. But this is a complete show stealer. This is another match in which I'm floored by the talent of Kendo specifically. Superboy, Piloto Suicida, they're back in the fold. They're absolutely brilliant. The Delphin Sato stuff is incredible. Grand Nanawa's charisma is through the roof. This is not, a Sekigun versus Kaientai 6-man. It's a completely different tone. It's worked a completely different way. It's its own thing. And whatever this thing is, which I think is largely a branch of the UWA, Universal in Mexico, and sort of the evolution of that specific style, where Michinoku Pro would evolve, and that style would evolve into Toryumon, and here we are present day. This style of wrestling is fantastic, and there's nothing like this in modern day wrestling. There's no promotion that I think even comes close to doing this type of thing, and I think this specific match and this style of wrestling should be celebrated far more than they are.
Yeah, and I think it, like, maybe at the time, a level of respect for like what comedy wrestling would become, and maybe like with 2025 eyes, we sit through so much more bad comedy wrestling that when you see some people who are like infinitely talented, like Sato and Delphin and even Superboy, be able to tap into that and it being just as good as their legit straight work, it deserves to be celebrated. And I really do think that this match, especially for where it is in 1994, and with the way that Lucha Rest will like deviate into like the sprint matches, and then you would see like variations of the sprint match now being imitated on WWE and AEW television. You don't see this match imitated, but this match you would see a lot more like going into like the 2000s in Osaka Pro. And I mean, there's even like elements of the humor that you would even still see in Dragon Gate sometimes to this day that kind of come out of a lineage that I think maybe starts right here.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you're right in the sense that the tone of this match is completely absent from American TV wrestling. But one of the big spots of this match is that Delphin accidentally does the arm wringer spot on Nanawa, where Delphin's facing the crowd, Nanawa's arm is draped over the top rope, and he's wrenching the arm thinking it's his opponent. And the Young Bucks did that on TV a month ago, and it caused an uproar because people had never seen that spot before. But that's an 80s lucha spot that the Bucks were doing, and people acted like that was the thing that was going to finally kill the business. But in reality, you see it here in this Michinoku Pro match in 1994.
Yeah, and then they, of course, play into Nanawa then quitting the match, and then they try to get someone into the crowd to join the Delphin Corps, and they immediately defect over the babies' faces. You have some great Ted Tanabe in this match. I had the problem, and I like doing my little preview clips for each episode, just like a little fun thing that doesn't necessarily relate to the narrative, but it's just things that I enjoy. And more often than not, it involves Superboy whenever he's around. But Case, when I was putting together the preview clip for this episode, I had to stop myself because I felt like I was starting to put together just a music video of how much I was really enjoying this match. And because like you have like these sequences like with Superboy and Sato where like the way that both of them move around for guys of like their size, and maybe it's the false impression that you get when you see someone who's a little bit more thick and you're go like, oh, they're not going to be able to be pinpoint high flyers, and then like the flying headbutts that you have coming out of these guys, and even like the aspect of like kendo just playing to the crowd and having them in the palm of their hands. I like seeing wrestlers work a crowd, and if that's doing it in a way of having like modern Johnny Valletta terrifying people in a Bruiser Brody homage gimmick, or if it's someone being able to get the crowd to just respond to them and be able to play off of that in such a way that Kendo was able to do in this match. It's just, if you have a place in your wrestling fandom or viewing or however you want to put it for a match that's not completely just grappling men being men, like the sport of pro wrestling, and you're someone who enjoys like the wider breadth of it, this is like as easy as a recommendation as anything on this episode. Like this is the thing that I was like hoping to get to when we started this series, because I knew about all the and we've talked about a lot of the Sekigun versus Kaintai deluxe matches, but getting into people like Nanawa and getting into like every time I see Kendo, I'm just kind of taken aback by just his command. It's amazing.
Kendo's the one, because as I watch more of him, whether it be Universal Japan or here in Michinoku, and I say this being entirely unfamiliar with his late 90s CMLL work, and that's something that I'm going to try to change here pretty soon. He does feel like one of the great victims of lack of 80s Mexico footage, because there is something about Kendo that, first of all, I mean, can you imagine if he came along today, just how big of a star he would be, and how quickly, you know, whether it would be in Japan or in Mexico or in the US, how quickly that act would get over. But also it's just, it feels
would get
like
over to like even on like AEW TV, that would be like one of the more over acts,
because he's so athletic. He has the athleticism of a modern day wrestler. And so that's, you know, that's the interesting thing is, again, I say this, you know, prefacing it with, I don't know what his 97 through 2000 on CMLL really looks like, but it does feel like with him, we're just missing that one thing historically where we could all point and go, look at how amazing Kendo was. This guy could do this, this, and this, and isn't it obvious how great he is? And I'm not necessarily sure he has that, but he's got a bunch of matches like this where you can watch it with your jaw on the floor, you know, between him and the other big winner of this match, who is Superboy. You know, guys that, again, this is why I wanted to do this project was, you know, yes, it's awesome to rewatch some Sasuke stuff and to go, hey, wasn't Super Delphin great? But I always felt like there was a greater story to this promotion with the Kendos and with the boys and all the guys like that. And it's turning out to be true, because this is a match that is, you know, largely the secondary characters of Michinoku Pro Wrestling and a lot of their foreigners. And this match is utterly phenomenal.
Yeah, no, Superboy, and the way that it, like, he constantly is playing with the crowd. Whenever he goes to the outside, he immediately finds people in the crowd to immediately start fanning him, and then every spot he goes outside, they start fanning him. It's real special stuff, and the Cyreal rocket that happens towards the closing stretch out of him, that it completely caught me aghast. I was like, because basically Delphin is setting up Superboy for a move off the top rope, but Superboy keeps on telling him to move it, and at a certain point you're like, he's not gonna make it, and then he does the double jump splash, and it's absolutely perfect. Just one of my favorite matches that we have had so far on this series.
I don't know if I'll verbally be able to do the spot justice, but I was talking earlier about when Sato and Liger wrestled in that 8-man, it made me realize that nobody knows how to do a good arm drag anymore, because Sato does all these arm drags on Liger that look absolutely incredible. And there's one in this match where Sato and Superboy are in the ring. And this is very early on in the match. They kind of brawl on the floor to start, and then they get back in the ring. And Sato does this tricked out lucha sequence, and it ends with him doing an arm drag takedown on Superboy in all in one motion. And Superboy's a giant guy, but all in one motion, he takes the arm drag, he takes the bump, he rolls out of the ring, and in the most fluid way possible, sort of spins into a front row chair. And it's the most athletically impressive thing that I've ever seen. It was so clean, and where the offensive move looked impactful, but also Superboy just does this insane sell that winds up with him sitting front row. And I no one's doing that. This is absolutely essential viewing.
Yeah, this is what, like, I appreciate big men doing athletic things. Like, we are both big fans of Willie Mack, but like, this was like just to like another level. It's like seeing it's like being in Stone Age and someone suddenly shows up with a smartphone. You're just like, I did not think that someone could do that, and I did not think that you could do that, Superboy.
No, Superboy's incredible. Pileto Suicida, obviously worthy of being back on another tour. I really like his work as well. So this is a 4-star match for me, and one that I think you absolutely have to go watch, because it's a lot of the guys that aren't celebrated when you talk about Michinoku Pro.
And also some all-time bad gear from Piloto Suicida.
Absolutely terrible.
It is a bright color of green that absolutely matches the Michinoku Pro lit canvas.
It's kind of the precursor to like a Mr. Iguana type look.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way to put it. And then we had more of the Universal retrospective segments. You had Sasuke, you had Ultimo, you had Gato, but then you had Shinzaki, and Shinzaki's the only one who doesn't speak because kayfabe's a thing, brother. And we're going to the main event where it's Ultimo teaming with Sasuke, both of them coming out to Separados, versus Gato and Shinzaki, and what kind of was like set up as the like Universal All-Star match.
And this is the show that is spending a lot of time praising Liger and obviously praising Sasuke and all these guys. It is the show for me where I once again have to take down Ultimo Dragon, because I found this match not to be bad, but to be a match that never got out of its opening gear. And you think about what happened with Jado and Taco and the way they were able to escalate that, and then the 6-man tag that we just spent so much time talking about, and how that, was able to go from point A to point B in this really natural way. And I kept on waiting for this match to feel like an epic. It's the match that people paid their money to go see, a bunch of big stars, very special setting. And it just kind of existed to me.
It was kind of like an old school Heat match.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that was on a show like this with like, especially your hometown fans that have like seen like the Sasuke versus Shinzaki, double count out. And then with like, okay, Ultimo is now with Sasuke, and Ultimo still having like this kind of figure. It is that level of kind of disappointment. You do, though, have like little moments in this match that I thought that it was kind of interesting to see. Like Ultimo with Shinzaki was an interesting contrast of like just two guys who approach wrestling fundamentally, and you could tell by the way they conduct themselves, in completely kind of different ways. And this match, like one of my notes I have down here is, you could see this show and it becomes very obvious the way that Ultimo turned out.
Yeah, because I would agree. Expand on your thoughts, but I would agree with that.
Because like he's treated like a god. He comes in, and yes, like yes, we all know like Yahaba and Iwate, this is like a big show for Michinoku Pro, and in particular like the idea of Sasuke and Tohoku, right? Like that's been the concept from day one through the end of this, is been, we're based here, it's Sasuke's from here, and he is like our hometown hero kind of thing. And then Ultimo, in his manner, just like he comes out, the crowd goes insane for him. Sasuke goes to the ring and is like getting ready for the match, but Ultimo's still doing a lap around the ring. Ultimo, I will say, versus like nowadays, he breaks out so he does like a corkscrew tope that is actually really remarkable in this match. And he does the Cancun Tornado in 94. So it's not just us in our head going like, oh, is he actually going to leave his feet this match? But I feel like there's a through line just because of his general demeanor in this match and his reception to nowadays. Like, in a lot of ways, I think Ultimo Dragon is one of the most fascinating people when you talk about pro wrestling, just because of like his unique path and all of that. But you watch him just kind of just get idolized in front of this crowd, and then him kind of like sticking out, and you go like, yeah, nope. He already felt like he didn't kind of need to go and go into that gear because he's Ultimo and he's already received at this point because of past recognition.
It's a bummer because early on in the match, Shinzaki does the rope walk spot on Ultimo, and the place goes absolutely berserk. And, in the same way that I complimented Liger on, really giving in to Sasuke and Delphin and their whims, and you can just see that Ultimo doesn't want to do a Michinoku match, and they wanted him to do a Michinoku match, and it's frustrating because every time that he starts to dip his toe in, you go, oh, this could be something really special, and then it falls flat, and it really acts as a vehicle for, hey, it's another cool Shinzaki Sasuke chapter. Great. We've seen those guys have a bunch of good matches. This is another one, but it's like this match is good in spite of Ultimo.
Yeah, and then like you have like Ultimo kind of just, other than his spots, not necessarily doing a whole lot, and then like Sasuke goes and does an over the ring post moonsault to the outside, it's two different minds in a lot of different ways, but it ends with the Cancun Tornado on Gato. There was the aspect, I don't read the results before I watch this footage usually, and I was going like, all right, so Shinzaki's not going to lose here because he's on his way out and he never loses. And Ultimo clearly is not going to win. Is Sasuke going to job in his hometown? I was like, oh, no, Cancun Tornado. There we go. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So there you go. A show that I think is defined by the Taka versus Jado match, which is better than you would ever dream of it being. And then this really unheralded 6-man tag that I think really it's a special match and a special style of wrestling. And, you're left with the main event that is, it's a lot like the singles match with Ultimo and Sasuke. It's good, but you saw what Liger did, and he did it better. And you've seen what Sasuke and Shinzaki can do with one another, and that's better. And Gato certainly had the track record, even at this point, of having a higher ceiling. It's just this weird push and pull with Ultimo in the context of Michinoku Pro that is fascinating. And I don't think he would ever be able to speak on record about it. Again, when Roy Lucier asked him a few years ago why he wasn't in the J Cup, and he gave him a one-word answer of politics. I think we have all we need to know about Ultimo and how he thinks about this time period, but the mid-90s relationship with Sasuke is one that is very interesting as you go through this timeline.
And it's interesting, like, you have this match, and I do want to talk about the show close angles.
Please.
That it kind of goes and it gets chaotic in a way that we haven't seen from Michinoku Pro in recent months, but we saw especially over the summer of 93 with Delphin, where Super Delphin was towards the back during this match, and he cuts a promo on Jado and Gato in the ring. This was after Ultimo and Sasuke celebrate. Fans are moving towards the ring, and that brings out Jado comes out, and Gato, who is already out there, and then they fight him, and they try to like rip him off his table and throw his chairs, and then Ultimo chews them out whatsoever, and chews out Jado and Gato. And that leads Delphin to me like, go, Ultimo, what are you doing about this? How about I come and take your mask? Which is awesome. And Delphin has to make sure that he gets over in the end.
Yep, there you go. A very, very enjoyable angle to close the show.
Yeah, but interesting show, especially given a time period where we see not a lot of Michinoku making tape when the rest, when the promotion was making its mark in other promotions.
Yeah, I mean, this is a commercial tape, but we don't seem to have any TV footage from. Let me go back to the last episode here. So we would have had
the last TV footage we had was Oda.
Yeah, so 4/29, and then we don't have any proper TV footage until September. The next episode. So that's an entire 2 summer tours with just no footage, which is a real bummer because you can see that this promotion is really starting to find its footing.
Yeah, and especially even Sasuke mentioning how well this summer went for them. But summer is over for Michinoku Pro Wrestling. Case, what will we be talking about on episode 7 of those days?
Episode 7, we dive into the story of Jushin Thunder Liger, the attempts to get him to work Michinoku Pro in 1994, why it doesn't end up happening, 2 full Michinoku Pro shows to review, and we'll make a trip back to New Japan for one of the other biggest Great Sasuke matches of 1994 as well.
Yep, and that will be all on the next edition of Those Days. If you want to support the show, the best way to do it is click the show notes, go to the redcircle.com landing site, click the red box that says sponsor this podcast. I don't know why they say sponsor this podcast. That's just what Red Circle does. But what it is it's a donation button. You can set up a one-time or recurring donation. No obligation, but I would like to again thank our previous donors. If you want to follow us on social media, Case is on Twitter at _InYourCase. I'm on Twitter at FujiHeya. You could follow the show on Twitter at OpenVoiceGate. We are under that name on Blue Sky as well. If you want to join the conversation, step inside the Voices of Wrestling Discord, where we have our normal Dragon Gate channel that for VoiceGate, where we talk about Dragon Gate as it happens. But more importantly, for Those Days, we have our Open the VoiceGate channel, where we post all of our show notes, and then especially for shows like this one where there's a lot of matches from a lot of different places, we post the match listing there. That's the Voices of Wrestling Discord. But that's going to do it this time on Those Days. Next time we'll talk about the ballad of Jushin Thunder Liger and his attempts to be in Michinoku Pro in 1994. That's going to do it for us this time. Take care, everyone.
Hi, I'm Andrew Rich. And if you're like me, you look at the state of modern wrestling discourse and think, wow, what a cesspool. That's why I'm here to tell you about Music of the Mat Remix. That's right, your favorite wrestling music podcast is back with a new format, where I bring on a guest and we play songs related to wrestling-themed topics. It could be a wrestling reference, a wrestling concept, a wrestling pun, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, Andrew, that is a very, very tenuous connection to pro wrestling on a wrestling podcast network. Is this just an excuse to hang out with your friends and talk about music and ignore the rest of the wrestling landscape? Yes. Yes, it is. So listen to Music of the Mat Remix on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast player of choice.
Going to the gym can be discouraging, especially if you're putting in the work but barely seeing changes. But with Tonal, you can actually see your progress with every workout. Tonal provides the convenience of a full gym and the expertise of a personal trainer anytime at home with one sleek system. Designed to reduce your mental load, Tonal is the ultimate strength training system, helping you focus less on workout planning and more on getting results. No more second-guessing your technique. Tonal gives you real-time coaching cues to dial in your form and help you lift safely and effectively. After a quick assessment, Tonal sets the optimal weight for every move and adjusts in 1 pound increments as you get stronger, so you're always challenged. Tonal lets you choose from a variety of expert-led workouts, from strength to arrow hit to yoga and mobility, to keep you coming back for more. For a limited time, go to Tonal.com to get $500 off your Tonal purchase, plus a free 4-year warranty. That's Tonal.com for $500 off, plus a free 4-year warranty. Tonal.com.